Hi everyone. In this video, I want to explain a little bit about one of the main ways we think about summarizing information about categorical variables, and that is by making a frequency distribution table or chart. So the idea with a frequency distribution is that we're going to count the number of times a particular value occurs in a data set. So for example, I've started to make a little table right here. I'm going to count the number of individuals in our data set whose dwelling type is listed as a home, condo, and apartment, respectively. There's a couple of different ways to do this. The first way I'm going to show you is by using a function called Countif. So if I start typing count, I'll see that coming down here I have Countif. So if I arrow down to that and hit tab, the function will autocomplete. The range is the set of cells I want Excel to look in. The criteria is the value of the variable that I want it to count. And in this case, I want it to count up the number of times the word home appears in that column. So I'll click on that as my criteria. I'm going to close my parenthesis and hit enter, and I'll see that 404 individuals in this sample live in a home. Now, because of how I typed this, I'll be able to just copy it down. We're going to move to the corner of that selected cell until we see the plus sign change. So did you see it change from a fat plus sign to a skinny one? Once we get there, I can click. I'm going to click and hold and drag down. And what we'll see up here in the formula bar is what's actually happening. So I originally typed Countif. The column K contains the word that shows up in cell P13. And when I copied down, Excel changed the row number from P13 to P14. And when I copied again, it changed that number to P15. So that in this cell, Excel is giving us the count of the number of times in column K, whatever the value in P15 is, shows up. It's called a relative cell reference. So when I take this and I copy it down 2 rows, the row that appears in this index gets copied down twice as well. All right, so this gives us our frequency table for the dwelling type in this data set. And we can also compute a relative frequency. Instead of giving actual counts, we're going to give just percentages. So in order to compute the percentage of all the individuals that show up in this data set that live in a home, I'm going to actually need to know the total number of individuals that show up in this data set. And to get that, I'm going to just sum these 3 numbers up. Now the relative frequency, it's going to be the number of times that a particular value occurs as a measurement of this variable divided by the total number of individuals in the data set. So this relative frequency value will be equal to this value divided by this value. And now I can just copy this down, but watch what happens. In both of these cells, because I just copied down, I'm now getting a divide by 0 error. So let's see what happens. In this cell, the one that I typed in, I have Q13 divided by Q16. If I just copy this down, so increase the row index by 1, Excel will increase the row index of every cell reference that appears in my formula, because it thinks that I want to compute based on relative position rather than absolute position. I do want my next computation to be about condos, so I want to take Q14, right? That's this cell's address, Q14, and divide it by this total. But Excel is increasing the index of both of those cell references. And that's a problem because there's no value here. This is really a warning that says you tried to divide by 0. So what will I do? Well, I'm going to go back to my original formula and do this trick where we put in what we call an absolute cell reference. So if I put a $sign in front of that 16, that's going to tell Excel that when I copy this formula down, I don't want the row 16 to be changed. I want it to stay fixed. So let's see if this works. And it does. Looking at the formula bar for the cells that we just copied into, the 14 is changing because there's no $ indicating an absolute reference, but the 16 does not change because there is a $ that says this is an absolute reference, don't change it. So now we have our relative frequencies, and relative frequencies are often viewed as percentages, right? So this, when I read this now, it tells me that 47% of the individuals in this study live in a home and 25% live in an apartment. Okay, so this is how we compute frequency and relative frequency using the Countif function.